I never expected my 35th birthday to become the mark of the cruelest betrayal of my life. All morning I was busy in the cozy little kitchen of the old wooden house on Willow Street, the house I had spent 5 long years restoring from a crumbling wreck into a place filled with memories. I had scrubbed every brick on the exposed wall by hand, replaced each window pane myself, and brought the backyard garden back to life with rows of lavender that bloomed bright purple in the summer. This wasn't just a house. It was my heart. The simple birthday party was something I had planned myself, just a few familiar faces in the family. My parents, uncles, my brother, Daniel, and of course, Ivy, the cousin who always showed up at family gatherings with a smile as sweet as honey and a cocktail dress that didn't quite match the warm, intimate vibe of the celebration. "Olivia, open your gift. This one's really special," my mom said with a big smile, her hands trembling slightly as she handed me an envelope wrapped in shiny silver paper, tied with a red bow like it was the most precious gift in the world. I smiled back, not suspecting a thing. The room was filled with laughter and conversation, the scent of vanilla cake still lingering in the air. I untied the bow, peeled back the foil wrapping, and pulled out the stack of papers inside. My eyes quickly scanned the bold, black-inked heading, short and cold. "Eviction notice." The air in the room thickened. My hand froze mid-air, my mind spinning. "What is this?" I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. My father wouldn't look at me, his head bowed as if in shame. My mother blinked rapidly, avoiding my gaze. Daniel took a small step back. And Ivy... She smiled, but not her usual gentle smile. It was the smile of someone who knew everything, waiting for the moment another person crumbled. "Olivia, we know today isn't the ideal time, but it's time we were honest," my mother said, her voice barely above a breeze. "What do you mean? This is my house." I shot to my feet, the chair scraping harshly against the wooden floor. "I renovated every brick, every door in this place. I poured my life savings into it." Ivy set her wine glass down and stood up slowly, her voice calm and weightless. "But the house is still under your aunt and uncle's name, Olivia. On paper, it was never really yours." I turned to her. "You knew? You're siding with them?" "I'm just helping the family make a smart decision," she said, smoothing the silk of her dress. "This neighborhood's hot right now. It makes sense to sell." I let out a dry, hollow laugh. "So this is the birthday present you all prepared for me? An eviction notice? And you turned my home into a market listing." My father still said nothing. My mother stepped closer, reaching as if to take my hand. "You have 45 days to get things in order. We'll help with moving costs if you need." I pulled my hand away like I'd touched fire. "I don't need anything from anyone. I need answers." "How long have you all been planning this?" Ivy raised her chin, unfazed. "About 3 months. I've already spoken to a few potential investors. They're interested in the size of the lot and the prime location. This old wooden house? Old." I choked on the word. "Every corner, every brick in here is my work. I've lived and loved this house with everything I have." Daniel spoke, his voice low. "Liv, maybe you should calm down. We can talk about this later." No later. I want the truth." "Right, now." No one answered. The room sank into an unbearable silence. I stepped back, heart pounding, eyes scanning the familiar faces that suddenly felt like strangers. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice low but firm. "Olivia." I said out, now. One by one they left the room, none of them daring to look back at me. Only Ivy remained, facing me. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said with a shrug. "And you just made me lose all faith in family." I walked to the door and opened it. Out. Ivy gave me one last look, her eyes glinting with something icy. "You're fighting a battle you can't win. Don't let emotions cloud your judgment." The door shut behind her. I stood there for a long time, eyes still fixed on the paper in my hand. In all my years, I had never felt so hollow. But in that silence, a thought sparked. If Ivy thought I would give up that easily, she didn't know me at all. I sat motionless in the armchair by the window, the late afternoon sun slanting through the sheer curtains, casting a soft orange hue across the floor. The eviction notice lay silently on the coffee table, like an open wound that hadn't stopped bleeding, in a room still echoing with the warmth of laughter from that morning. I should have cried, should have been furious, but the only thing I felt at that moment was suspicion. Ivy. Since when had that seemingly harmless cousin become the mastermind behind pushing me out of my own home? From the casual comments about property value to the scrutinizing looks I once mistook for admiration, all of it now formed the perfect pieces of a carefully hidden scheme. I picked up my phone, my fingers dialing almost instinctively. The first person I needed was Emma, my best friend from college, the one who'd pulled me through sleepless exam nights, heartbreaks, and the craziest home renovation projects. Olivia? Emma's voice came through after 3 rings. Are you okay? No, I answered bluntly. I need you here. Bring your laptop, and if you still have that stack of old renovation permit files, bring those too. Less than an hour later, Emma showed up at my door, hair tousled and her backpack stuffed. As soon as she saw me, she didn't ask a thing, just gave my shoulder a firm squeeze, walked in, pulled out her laptop, and began searching through folders organized with obsessive precision. Got it, Emma said, turning the screen toward me. Every permit, blueprint, and city approval. I backed them up ages ago. Good thing I never deleted them. I stared at the screen. These files could be the key. Ivy said the neighbors complained I was renovating without permits. She showed my parents some documents, but no one would let me see them. Emma frowned. Could they be fake? I nodded, and if they are, then she's executing a much bigger plan. That night, I texted Daniel, my brother. We used to be close, but ever since he got married and moved out, the distance had grown. Still, I knew if anyone in the family had any sense left, it was him. I need to meet you. Urgently, I wrote. Daniel replied a few minutes later. Tomorrow morning, Cornerstone Cafe, 8 o'clock. The next morning, I arrived 10 minutes early, sitting by the window with a cup of hot tea. Daniel walked in looking exhausted like he hadn't slept all night. I didn't waste time. You knew about the eviction, didn't you? Daniel nodded, avoiding my eyes. Yeah, about 2 weeks ago. Ivy told Mom and Dad that you weren't fit to manage the house, that there was a risk of legal trouble because of unpermitted work. All lies. I placed Emma's folder on the table. Here's every permit, legal, verified. Daniel flipped through a few pages, his face slowly draining of color. So, she lied to me too? And I believe there's more to it. I looked him straight in the eye. Ivy wants the house, not for herself but to sell. Probably to some development project. Maybe someone she's dating? Daniel frowned. His name's Max Harper. I've never met him, but Dad mentioned he's into real estate investment. Exactly. I'm going to dig deeper, but I need your help. If Mom and Dad believe her because of documents, I'll prove she forged them. Daniel sighed. I'm with you. Better late than ever. Back at home, Emma and I began tracking leads. She had an old classmate named Chloe who worked at the city's land records office, now overseeing construction permits for my area. After a few calls and a post-work coffee invite, Chloe agreed to meet at the public library. She pulled out a thick file and flipped to the page I needed. Here's the petition about noise and unauthorized renovations supposedly filed by a neighbor, or at least the copy that was submitted. But the strange thing is, there's no original, no official case number. I frowned. You mean, it's not in the system? Exactly. And the name listed as the complainant doesn't match anyone on Willow Street's resident registry. I double-checked. This might be a fabricated document. Emma snapped photos of every page, her eyes lighting up. We've got signs of forgery. I felt a chill run down my spine. If Ivy had actually faked documents to manipulate my parents, this wasn't just a family conflict anymore. It was a serious ethical and legal issue. We left the library as twilight fell. The streetlights flickered on, reflecting off the familiar Willow Street Historic District sign. I paused at my gate, gripping the folder tightly. This house wasn't just where I lived. It was the story of my growth, the proof of my dedication and love poured into every brick, every window frame. And now, it was under threat by someone who once called me sis. I looked over at Emma, my voice steady. If Ivy thinks she's smarter than me, she's made a huge mistake. Emma nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. Game on, Liv, and we're going to win. Darkness settled over Willow Street, but inside me a light had just been lit. The light of truth, and I was going to bring it into the open, no matter what. A light drizzle was falling when Emma and I returned to the city the next morning, our hands clutching the folder full of new leads. It was time to piece them together into a bigger picture. Ivy didn't just want to take my house. She was preparing to demolish it. That afternoon, Daniel took us to meet one of his contacts, a man named Marcus Bell who worked at the city planning office. Marcus was the cautious type, but after reviewing the documents Chloe had confirmed as fake, he frowned deeply. This is strange, Marcus said, flipping through the detailed plans with professionally drawn lines. I seen this version during a closed-door meeting a few weeks ago. Who's the developer? I asked, a gut feeling beginning to simmer. Marcus typed a few lines into his computer and turned the screen toward me. Under the logo of a construction company called Harper & Stone Group was the heading, Proposed Luxury Apartment Complex, Location, 197 Willow Street. I froze. That was my address, my house. Emma looked at me, eyes wide. Max Harper, Ivy's boyfriend. He's the Harper in Harper & Stone. I tried to keep my voice steady. Do they have any documents signed by my parents? Marcus paused, then nodded. There's a land survey approval form with signatures from Mr. and Mrs. Rickman, your parents. I stood still. But my parents never told me about any of this. They still think I broke the law, let alone signed off on selling the land. Marcus frowned. The signatures look odd. Might be copies. If you want, I can have the legal department take a closer look. Please, I cut in, as soon as possible. Marcus agreed to help. On the way home, I pulled out my phone and started typing a message to my mom, but deleted it before hitting send. I wasn't ready to face them. Not yet. Not until everything was clear. That night, Emma stayed over like we used to during college. We sat by the fireplace, going over every blueprint, signature, and seal. This, notary seal, Emma said, pointing to the survey form. Whose is it? I held the paper up to the light. Under the round red stamp were the words, Notary Public, Elizabeth Sterling. I frowned. Sterling. That's Ivy's last name, right? Emma opened her laptop and searched. Here it is, Elizabeth Sterling, Ivy's biological mother. She used to be a notary, but she retired almost 2 years ago. Then, how did she notarize a document filed just weeks ago? I asked, feeling heat rush to my temples. Emma looked at me, serious. If that seal was used after she retired, that's falsifying a notarized document. That's a criminal offense. I let out a long breath. Ivy was taking this too far. The next morning, I was about to drive to meet Marcus when I saw my windshield shattered. A large rock lay in the front seat, still covered in damp dust. Wrapped around it was a small piece of paper, scrawled with a shaky handwritten message. Back off while you still can, Olivia. My heart pounded. I looked around, but the street was empty. No one suspicious in sight. I called the police and, while waiting for them to arrive, I texted Emma and Daniel to come immediately. The police took my statement and collected the rock as evidence. They advised me to install security cameras and to report any further incidents. I nodded, but I knew. This wasn't about paperwork anymore. Ivy had started sending warnings through action. 3 days later, I received an email from Marcus with the subject, Signature verification results. I opened it, palms sweating. After comparing with the original signatures on the Rickman's property and tax documents, we have determined the signature on the land survey is forged. I clenched my fist. That was our first piece of solid proof. Emma called me as soon as she got the copy. It's starting, Liv. We need a game plan. That evening, in my kitchen, Emma, Daniel, and I mapped out a strategy. The plan. Gather all the evidence. Fake documents, forged notarizations, shady land surveys, and Ivy's connections to Max Harper and the real estate development firm. We also agreed we had to stop them from demolishing the house before the truth came out. Emma suggested reaching out to Leela, her friend who worked at the Historical Preservation Office, to check if my house might qualify for protected status. If it did, they couldn't touch it without city approval. Just then, the doorbell rang. I stepped out and froze. Sitting on the porch was a cardboard box with no sender listed. I opened it. Inside were full-color photographs, shots of every corner of my house. The kitchen, the living room, the stairwell where I used to hang my grandmother's photo, even the window I had just repainted last week. Every one of them was marked with a bright red X. No note, none needed. The message was crystal clear. I looked at Daniel. They've been inside the house. He snatched the box from my hands. No way. You locked the doors, right? Of course. I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. But they have a key. Probably from Mom. Daniel pulled out his phone and called our mother immediately. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I watched his face shift with every second. When he hung up, his expression was dark. Ivy borrowed the key yesterday. Told Mom it was to take measurements for her engagement party. And Mom believed that? I asked, my voice hoarse. Daniel nodded. She's suspicious now, but it's too late. I walked toward the window, looking out over the backyard. The garden, where my grandmother once planted rows of lavender, was now cloaked in evening mist. We need to move fast, I said, my voice low but firm. If Ivy wants a war, I'll show her. I'm not someone who goes down easy. I turned back to the only two people still standing by me. The campaign starts tonight. We're not just protecting this house. We're exposing the truth. Peace. Fear still lingered inside me, but for the first time in weeks, it didn't overpower my resolve. I wasn't alone, and I wasn't going to lose. 2 days after the break-in, I sat in the office of my lawyer, Sarah Holden, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a calm voice who had helped me with property documents in the past. This time, she wasn't just my legal advisor. She was a key ally in the battle I was about to face. Sarah flipped through the documents I'd gathered from Marcus, Chloe, and even the X-marked photos I'd taken as evidence. This is a pattern of deliberate behavior, she concluded, tapping her finger on the survey contract copy. Forged signatures, improper notarization, and clear organized fraud. If we can prove Ivy and Max colluded for personal gain, you won't just keep your house, you could take them to court. I nodded, but deep down I knew one thing. Winning in court wouldn't be enough. I needed a blow Ivy couldn't recover from. A truth bomb dropped right where she believed she stood in the spotlight of her own glory. The night before the engagement, where Ivy planned to introduce Max to family, investors, and wealthy friends, she had rented the Bellevue Grand Hotel, a lavish venue in the northern part of the city, to host a perfect debut evening. I would turn that party into a full reveal, and to do that, I needed someone on the inside. Someone who knew Max and Harper and Stone's operations better than anyone else. That person appeared unexpectedly. Lena Harper, Max's younger sister. I'd met Lena briefly back when I still got along with Ivy. She was quiet, usually hanging on the sidelines of their gatherings. But today, she reached out to me directly, leaving a brief message. Olivia, I know what Ivy's done. Meet me at 5 at Bean and Birch. I arrived on time. Lena was already seated in the corner, dressed in a charcoal gray coat. her sharp features betraying the tension in her posture. She gestured for me to sit, then handed me a USB drive. "This has everything," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Blueprints, emails between Max and Ivy, plans for clearing the land, including your house." I held my breath. "Why are you helping me?" Lena looked me straight in the eye. "I used to believe Max was a good person, but he and Ivy only care about power and image. They've turned our family business into a tool to hide their wrongdoing. I don't want to be part of it anymore." I nodded. "Thank you, this means a lot." "There's more," Lena said, pulling out a thick printout from her bag. "This is the party plan. Ivy rearranged the guest list, and you're not on it." I laughed. "Of course. She knows I won't stay silent. But I have a way to get you in." Lena slid a formal invitation across the table, still blank. I was in charge of delivering backup invites to the press. I kept this one. I took it and thanked her once more. Inside me, determination had turned into a slow-burning fire. I was no longer just fighting for my house, but for justice, for truth, for everyone who had ever been dismissed, deceived by expensive dresses and fake smiles. That night, I sat in my study with Sarah and Emma, and we prepared everything down to the last detail. Sarah compiled the documents into a complete dossier: forged evidence, falsified signatures, plans to demolish the house, internal company emails, and most notably an audio recording provided by Lena where Ivy said, "After the engagement party, no one will be able to stop us." "You're bringing all this to the party?" Emma asked, her voice tinged with nerves. I nodded. "Not just bringing it. I'm revealing it in front of everyone. Ivy wants to shine in the spotlight? Then let the truth shine right on her." Sarah handed me another USB. "I've backed everything up here, and I've also sent a copy to the media's legal rep, in case something unexpected happens." I gave a soft smile. Can never be too careful. The next morning, I received an anonymous message. "Stop now, if you don't want things to get worse. There are things you can't control, Olivia." I showed the message to Sarah. She looked at me calmly and said, "This just means they're scared." By evening, I dressed carefully. A simple, elegant black dress and a pearl necklace that once belonged to my grandmother. It felt like a charm, reminding me of where I came from, the love I poured into that home, and the reason I couldn't walk away. I stepped into the grand lobby of the Bellevue Grand Hotel, chandeliers casting golden light across the polished marble floor. Soft music played, glasses clinked, and laughter floated through empty congratulations. Ivy stood at the center of the ballroom, draped in a shimmering white gown, her arm looped around Max's. They looked like a magazine cover. But her gaze faltered the moment she saw me. I smiled, holding up the invitation. "Sorry, I couldn't miss this party." She tried to hide her surprise behind a smile. "Olivia, I didn't think you would—" "Excuse me," I cut her off, walking straight into the heart of the room. I lifted a wine glass and tapped it gently. "If I may have everyone's attention before dinner begins." All eyes turned toward me. The room paused for a breath. I took a deep one of my own. "This isn't a toast," I began, eyes drifting toward Ivy and Max. "It's the truth everyone deserves to know. About this party, about that couple, and about a house under threat because of greed." Ivy stiffened. Max gripped her hand. I reached for the USB Sarah had just handed me and plugged it into the large screen behind me. "Please watch." The lights dimmed. The screen lit up. And the storm was about to begin. The light from the big screen cast a glow across the ballroom. All eyes focused on the first image, a detailed development blueprint for a luxury condo complex named Willow Heights, with a clearly listed address, 197 Willow Street. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. A few guests whispered to each other, others stepped back, glancing at Max and Ivy as if waiting for an explanation. I stepped closer to the mic, my voice calm but firm. "This is a property currently owned by my family, and it's where I've lived for over 10 years. The plan to demolish that house and replace it with this luxury complex has never had my consent. All the so-called approvals you've seen are fake. Next, the screen displayed a series of documents. Among them, the land survey with my parents' forged signatures and the notary seal belonging to someone who retired last year. A sharp knock on the table came from a middle-aged man in the front row. Mr. Randall Morris, the project's lead investor. Forged documents? Do you have verifiable proof? I nodded and turned to Sarah, who stepped onto the stage. Sarah spoke clearly and firmly. We have confirmation from the city's legal department. All signatures, seals, and survey approvals fail to match official records. The notary, Elizabeth Sterling, MS, Ivy's biological mother, hasn't been licensed for over a year. This puts the entire documentation into the category of criminal fraud. Ivy stood frozen, her face drained of color. Max stepped forward, gripping her hand, ready to speak, but I didn't give them the chance. I'm not done, I said, eyes fixed on the screen. The next piece of evidence played through the speakers. An audio recording. Ivy's voice rang out, cold and deliberate. Let them think Olivia's breaking the law. Once the house loses legal protection, we can buy it for next to nothing. After the engagement party, everything will be in our hands. Then Max's voice chimed in. I've cleaned out all the internal files. No one will trace it back. The ballroom fell silent. The air turned heavy as lead. Max turned to Ivy, his face no longer composed. You recorded our conversation? Ivy whispered. I don't know who did. I looked at them, a faint smile forming on my lips. Maybe you don't, but someone close to you does. Lena stepped out from the crowd, her eyes sharp as ice. I sent the recording because I won't let you and Ivy drag our family through the mud. Max's jaw dropped, staring at his sister like he was seeing her for the first time. Lena, what are you doing? Ending this game, Lena replied. Ending all of it, Sarah continued. We've submitted all the evidence to the Department of Planning, the notary office, and the authorities. Police have received formal complaints for document forgery, attempted property fraud, and intentional damage to private property. As she finished, 2 plainclothes officers entered the ballroom. One stepped up to Ivy and said, Ms. Ivy Sterling, you are under investigation for document forgery and conspiracy to commit fraud. We ask for your cooperation. A stunned wave rippled through the room like a brewing storm. Ivy turned to me, her eyes filled with rage and reluctant resignation. You'll regret this, Olivia. You have no idea what you've just stepped into. I held her gaze, calm. And you have no idea who you underestimated. Max hadn't been handcuffed, but the investors had already started leaving his table, some without a word, others casting looks of disdain. Randall Morris slammed the project file onto the table and stood up coldly. Harper and Stone has lost all credibility with me. Sarah leaned toward me and whispered, We should go. The rest is in the hands of the authorities now. I nodded, but before leaving I paused in the center of the room, facing my parents, who had arrived late and witnessed the final moments. My mother's face was pale, my father frozen in place. I'm sorry I had to do this publicly, I said, my voice no longer angry but filled with sorrow. But without the truth, I would always be seen as the one at fault. My mother stepped forward and took my hand. Olivia, I had no idea Ivy could do this. We're truly sorry. I gently squeezed her hand, then turned to leave. Outside the hotel, the cool evening air brushed against my skin like quiet reassurance. Sarah handed me a folder. The court will review everything in the coming weeks, but with this evidence, your win is almost certain. Lena stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. Thank you for fighting. For the truth. I looked out toward the city lights in the distance, a slow smile spreading across my face. I just did what was right. Because I won't let anyone take away the place I call home. Peace began to return to my heart. The battle wasn't completely over. but the web of lies had been shattered. And for the first time in months, I was certain of one thing. The house still stood, and so did I. 6 weeks after that unforgettable engagement party, spring had truly returned to Willow Street. The trees lining the sidewalks began to bud, and the scent of lilacs from the neighbor's garden danced in the breeze. Everything seemed to slow down, as if life was giving me a pause to breathe after the chaos. My house, or rather the home I fought to protect, still stood strong, even after being threatened by greed and deceit. But what I didn't expect was that the very storm meant to tear it down would bring me a new family, a community I never knew I belonged to. Emma still stopped by every day, bringing coffee, notebooks, and ideas to renovate the house, not to sell, but to live in. Daniel came by on weekends with his wife and kids, helping me repaint the faded white fence and plant asters in the front yard. Lena, once just a quiet shadow at a lavish party, had now become a vital part of this healing journey. After the scandal, she officially left Harper & Stone and helped launch a local heritage preservation fund with a team of community activists. "Olivia," she said one afternoon as we inspected the roof, "this place isn't just your memory, it's part of this city. We want to start here." I was speechless when she handed me a bronze plaque engraved with small words. "The Rickman House, a living legacy of Willow Street." My throat tightened. No words were needed. I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The person I least expected also appeared one quiet morning. Max Harper. No suit, no arrogance. Just a man standing at my gate, looking lost. "I'm not here to apologize," he said plainly, "because I know sorry doesn't undo what I've done." I crossed my arms in silence. "But I want to make it right," Max continued. "I've resigned from the company. Lena and her team are building a preservation program, and if you'll allow it, I'd like to support it financially." I looked at him for a long moment and finally nodded. "Not because I forgive you, but because I believe everyone deserves a chance to start over. As long as they really start from zero." We shook hands and I felt lighter, not because Max had changed, but because I was no longer bound by bitterness. As for Ivy, the media moved on after she received a suspended sentence for document forgery and attempted fraud. No one in my family mentioned her again. My parents relocated to a quiet suburb, away from the noise. One afternoon, as I was sorting through old photo albums in the living room, my mom stopped by. She silently looked around the house, filled with memories. "I found this in Grandma's old box," she said, placing a worn wooden comb in my hand. "She used to brush my hair with it as a child. She always said this place wasn't just a home. It was the heart of the family." I said nothing. I just opened the window where I used to sit for hours as a child, reading in the sun. And in that moment, I knew this house would live on, not just in me, but in everyone who stepped through its door with sincerity. A few weeks later, I hosted a small gathering. Not fancy, not flashy, just a warm backyard dinner with the people who stood by me through the storm. Under the glow of string lights, everyone gathered around wooden tables, sharing food, laughter, and stories never told. Lena brought a large framed photo to hang from the cherry tree. My grandmother, standing in front of the house, her face radiant. Emma whispered to me, "You should make this a tradition, a day of hope, the day you took everything back." I nodded, eyes lifted to the tree full of lights. "A day of return." Daniel raised his glass and called for silence. "Let's toast to Olivia, who didn't just save a house, but restored our faith in the truth." Glasses clinked. I lifted mine, clinking gently with those around me, then whispered to myself, "And to those who dare to rise." That night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone on the front steps. The spring breeze danced through my hair. I looked around. Every brick, every window, every familiar footprint, all felt alive. I knew with certainty this wasn't just where I lived. This was where I belonged. And no one would ever take that from me again. From the fight to save my childhood home, I learned that sometimes loss and betrayal become the stepping stones to something far more precious: courage, truth, and the people who truly stand beside you. A home isn't just a roof over your head, but a sanctuary of memories, love, and resilience. And now I haven't just kept my home. I've reclaimed myself, stronger, wiser, and unafraid of losing anything ever again. What do you think about Olivia's journey and all she's been through? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel to keep discovering more heartfelt, inspiring stories about family and life behind the front door. My name is Ellie. I'm 33 years old and live in a quiet little town in Vermont. The white wooden house where my father and I used to live sits tucked on a hillside, blazing red leaves in the fall and thick layers of snow covering the roof like frosting in the winter. My father passed away 3 weeks ago, after nearly a year battling pancreatic cancer. I still remember that morning, before the sun rose over the distant mountains, when he quietly passed in his sleep. I haven't gotten used to the emptiness. Every morning, I still walk downstairs as if he were sitting in the living room, reading the paper and sipping coffee like always. Every time I pass his old armchair, my heart tightens. I took care of him during his illness. From the moment we got the diagnosis, I cut back at the town library and moved in with him, driving him to appointments, cooking, managing medications, and helping him sleep. Savannah, my younger sister, was completely absent. She lives in New York, works in public relations. When Dad began treatment, I called, texted, emailed, even wrote her a letter. But Savannah always claimed her schedule was packed, her job too demanding, and that she couldn't make a trip home. Once, she even said to me over the phone, irritated, "You know I don't do well with all that small-town sadness." I stayed silent. I was afraid if I spoke, I'd say something I couldn't take back. Savannah and I used to be close, but since she left for college, something slowly shifted between us. I stayed in town, lived simply, remained close to our parents. She, on the other hand, flew off like a freed bird into the city, chasing lights and endless parties. On the day of Dad's funeral, Savannah arrived almost an hour late. She stepped out of a rented SUV wearing a black designer dress and oversized sunglasses that covered half her face. I barely recognized her. She walked into the funeral home without saying a word. No hug for Mom, not even a glance toward me. It wasn't until the pastor started speaking that she finally sat in the front row, settling in like a distant guest of the deceased. 3 days after the funeral, Mom called us into the living room. She said, "Your father left a will." Savannah let out a dry laugh. Of course he did. I turned to Mom. She handed me a thin, yellowed folder and said the family lawyer would be here the next morning. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring out the big window. Snow had begun falling lightly outside, dusting rooftops across the town. I suddenly remembered something Dad once told me early on during his treatment. "When I'm gone, look for what I left behind. It's not in the will." At the time, I assumed he meant memories. But that night, the words kept me awake. The next morning, Mr. Peterson, our longtime family lawyer, arrived right on time, carrying a glossy black briefcase. We gathered around the dining table as Mom poured everyone tea. The air was tense but quiet. Mr. Peterson opened the case, pulled out a copy of the will, and began reading, "The house and all property in this area will be transferred to his wife, Mrs. Ruth Harper." Savannah raised her eyebrows, smirking with satisfaction. I felt like I'd been slapped. "Lastly," Mr. Peterson continued, "the remaining property, the small back house and the rear lot, will go to Ms. Ellie Harper." Savannah giggled. "The back house? You mean that old wooden shack behind the stable? How touching." I said nothing, but my chest tightened. I didn't care about the money. But why had Dad left Savannah all of it, and left me with just an old cottage he used as a garden retreat? When Mr. Peterson closed the file, my mother looked at me for a long moment. Her gaze said something I couldn't fully grasp, as if it carried a message left unsaid. That evening, she handed me an old iron key and softly said, "Go alone." I held the key in my palm, a mix of doubt and curiosity swirling inside me. The back house, what Dad jokingly called the hermit hut, had always been neglected. It was small, old, covered in dry leaves and moss, and one side had been struck by lightning a few years ago. Yet now, it was all I had. Savannah, on the other hand, practically jumped when she heard the words $120,000. She even turned to me with a half-pitying, half-triumphant look and said coldly, "Well, at least you've got a roof when the snowstorms hit." I pressed my lips together, not because of the shack, but because of the cruelty in the voice of the sister I used to love. I had spent the past year beside our father, managing every pill, every meal, every chemo session. Savannah called maybe a few times, sent flowers on Thanksgiving, then carried on with her dazzling city life. That afternoon, after seeing Mr. Peterson out, I pulled the key from my coat pocket and walked to the backyard alone. The snow had just melted, leaving the ground wet and slick beneath my boots. The back house sat nestled behind tall pines, silent like a forgotten memory. The peeling wooden door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside was pitch black, with only faint light through the window cracks. Dust coated everything, and faded cloths covered the furniture. I turned on my phone flashlight. An old wooden table, folded maps, a small bookshelf with worn paperbacks Dad once read. I was about to leave when the beam of light caught a photo above the fireplace. It was me and Dad, on the steps of this cottage the day I graduated high school, both holding hot cocoa, smiling wide. I reached out and touched the frame, throat tight. Behind the fireplace was a small rug. Something felt off. I knelt and found it held down by two misaligned bricks. Carefully lifting it, I uncovered a metal trapdoor with a handle. My heart pounded. I never knew this place had a basement. The iron key trembled in my hand as I fitted into the lock. Click. A deep, solid sound, like a secret answering back. I opened the hatch. Cold air and damp wood smell rushed up. A narrow wooden staircase led down. I hesitated, then descended. The basement was small, with low ceilings and paneled walls. A desk stood against one side, holding a black metal box and some notebooks. On the lid was a handwritten note. "Ellie, open when you're ready." I exhaled and opened the box with trembling hands. Inside wasn't cash, but a thick stack of documents, neatly clipped. On top was a yellow envelope labeled, "Investment account for Ellie only." I flipped through the papers. Dad had opened an investment fund over 10 years ago, in my name, and contributed small amounts every year. The current balance left me speechless, over $500,000. I collapsed into the corner chair, tears streaming down. Not because of the money, but because of the quiet, unwavering love behind it. A love that didn't need to be declared in a will. I understood now. Dad hadn't left me with just an old shack. He left me a legacy, a message, a lesson in faith and quiet strength, and I was just beginning to unlock it. I stepped out of the basement, heart still pounding. The cold outside couldn't shake me from what I'd just discovered. Over $500,000, an unimaginable sum for a small-town librarian like me. But more powerful was the way Dad had given it, discreetly, gently, as if he knew I'd never ask, never fight, and so he protected me in his own way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the bedroom window, looking out at the back house now cloaked in darkness. I remembered Dad's words, "The most precious things, Ellie, aren't always in plain sight." I'd laughed then, thinking he meant a rare book. Now I knew. He meant life itself. The next morning, I returned to the back house. Something still pulled at me, as if the hidden basement wasn't the only thing he'd left behind. I cleaned every dusty item, checked each drawer, each wall corner. Then, Standing before the back brick wall, I noticed something strange. A thin, almost invisible gap running along the base, only visible if you knelt to the floor. I used an old paring knife to gently pry at the gap, and the entire section of wall swung open like a door. Behind it was a narrow, pitch-dark space, just wide enough for one person to slip inside. My heart was racing again, but I stepped in, flashlight in hand. The space was smaller than I expected, with rough wooden walls and no windows. In the corner stood a moss-green safe, old, heavy, and coated in dust. I recognized it almost instantly. It used to sit in Dad's office, back when he ran his small construction company in town. I remembered it clearly, because as a child, I would sneak into his office after school, spin around in his leather chair, and play with everything on his desk. When I once asked what he kept in the safe, he just smiled and said, "A grown-up secret. Maybe one day you'll know." Now I was grown, and the safe was right in front of me. I rushed back down to the basement where I had found the document box. Inside were two small keys I hadn't figured out yet. I brought them both to the hidden room. The first didn't fit, but the second slid into the lock and gave a soft, strange click. I held my breath and turned the handle. The safe door opened slowly, revealing neatly arranged black velvet boxes, each labeled with Dad's familiar handwriting. I carefully opened each one. Inside were watches. Not just ordinary ones, but rare, vintage, and so exquisitely crafted that I was left breathless. There was a limited edition Rolex from the 1960s. A Patek Philippe I'd read about in a finance article once, valued in the hundreds of thousands. An entire collection, which I would later learn Dad had quietly built over more than 20 years. Each watch had been bought during business trips, each one holding a memory, a story. At the back of the safe was an envelope containing certificates and appraisals from a specialist in Boston. The total estimated value? Nearly $520,000. I sank to the wooden floor, eyes stinging. Dad had been preparing all of this for a long time, not just financially, but as a way to protect me, a message of quiet trust that I would know how to handle what he left behind. But I also knew this much: with a value like that, I couldn't just keep it all a secret. I needed guidance, and more importantly, I needed to honor the trust my father had sealed inside those silent velvet boxes. I spent nearly a week trying to calm my nerves. Each time I opened the safe and saw those watches shimmering under the flashlight, it felt like I was in some strange dream that could vanish if I blinked. But it was real. Every watch, every appraisal, every handwritten note from Dad. I knew that if I stayed quiet, no one would ever find out. But I also knew this kind of asset couldn't just sit untouched. I didn't want to live with fear or secrecy. If Dad trusted me enough to prepare all of this, then I had to handle it right, with integrity, transparency, and care. I called Mr. Peterson and told him everything. He listened silently, then said gently, "Ellie, your father was extremely meticulous. Those watches weren't titled under any name, but if kept in a safe considered part of the estate, they would technically be part of the inheritance. He advised I hire a licensed accountant to assess and properly declare everything, to avoid future complications." A few days later, I was referred to Clara Jensen, a tax accountant based in Montpelier. From our very first meeting, I could tell she was professional and kind. Clara came to my house on a Friday morning with her laptop, documents, and a handheld scanner. Together, we opened the safe and went through each item. As she carefully slipped on gloves, she exclaimed, "This is an exceptional collection, Ellie. Some of these, if auctioned properly, could go far beyond the listed value." I sat beside her, opening each velvet box, telling her what I remembered about Dad. How he wore the gold longines at my graduation. Or how he once hid a pocket watch in my lunchbox to surprise me. After 3 hours of careful work, Clara concluded, "The current estimated value is around $523,000. You'll need to pay inheritance tax based on that. However, payments can be arranged, gradually, or deducted from any sales proceeds. I nodded. I don't plan to keep them all. I'll choose a few that hold memories. The rest, I think they deserve to go to people who truly appreciate their worth. In the weeks that followed, with Clara's help, I sold 11 valuable watches at a reputable auction house in Boston. After taxes and fees, the total amount I received was nearly $340,000. Most of it went toward covering the inheritance taxes. The remainder, I set aside to give small gifts to the people who had supported my father during his illness. Dr. Wells, Nurse June, and Mr. Tom, the retired neighbor who shoveled our driveway when I was away. I sent simple gifts: a gift card, a handwritten thank you note, and a small photo of me and Dad from the past. I didn't want anyone to think I was showing off. I just believe gratitude should be spoken and, when possible, shown. As for me, I kept 3 watches: the silver pocket watch Dad wore on special holidays, a vintage Bulova my mom once gave him, and a simple Hamilton he handed me when I started at the library. "So you'll always be on time. And remember, time is precious," he said when placing it in my hand. Everything seemed to settle down. I went back to work at the library, started fixing up the main house so Mom could move in. Life slowly returned to its rhythm. Until one late afternoon in mid-February, as the snow began to melt and the sky turned a pale shade of gray, I heard a car pull up out front. Through the window, I saw Savannah stepping out of a sleek black sedan, holding a designer purse, heels sinking into the damp ground. She stood still for a long moment, then looked directly at the window where I stood. Her eyes. They weren't smug like on the day of the will reading, nor proud like usual. They were empty, tired, and maybe even desperate. I stepped away from the window, my chest heavy. Part of me wanted to walk away, but another part urged me to open the door. Savannah stood on my porch, her wavy brown hair tousled by the wind, high heels muddy, and that hollow look in her eyes made me freeze in the doorway. I opened the door and silently faced my sister. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "How have you been?" she asked, voice weightless, as if drained of emotion. I nodded. "Do you want to come in?" Savannah stepped inside, removed her wet shoes, and sat down like she didn't have the strength to maintain her usual polished act. I poured her a cup of hot tea, my mind swirling with unanswered questions. "I heard you sent gift cards to the people who helped Dad," Savannah began, eyes fixed on her cup. "A doctor, a nurse, even Mr. Tom next door. You had money to do that?" I blinked. "It was just a gesture of thanks." Savannah nodded, then looked up and stared straight at me. "But where did you get the money?" I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew any explanation would lead to a truth she couldn't handle. "Do you think I won the lottery?" I asked, half joking, half testing. Savannah laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. At first, no. But then I ran into Aunt Nora at that party. She said you gave her a $500 gift card. She said, "Ellie's so thoughtful, even after your dad passed. But I know you were never the type to have money lying around." I said nothing, turning to the window. Outside, the gray sky hinted at another snowstorm. Savannah kept talking, her voice rising. "Then I remembered the way you went quiet during the will. The way you kept sneaking around that back house like you were hiding something. And then I remembered Dad's old office safe. I started wondering, is there something in that house that I don't know about?" I turned to her. "Savannah, what I received isn't what you think. You're not a good liar, Ellie," she cut in. "And that makes me even more certain." I was about to speak when Savannah suddenly stood, grabbed her coat, and said sharply, "I just want to know. If I sold off my presents during Dad's final year, the least I deserve is to know what I missed." What I didn't know was that after leaving my house that night, Savannah drove straight to Mom's. Mom called me close to midnight. Her voice trembled through the phone. Ellie, someone broke in. I thought it was a burglar, but it was Savannah. I shot up from bed, heart pounding. What did she do? I'm not sure. I heard noises in the basement. Then I saw her run upstairs with a flashlight in her hand. I asked her what was going on, but she wouldn't say a word. Then she left. I drove to my mother's house immediately, still not fully understanding what had happened. But when I arrived, the basement door was wide open. The floor was a mess. Some cardboard boxes were ripped apart, but the safe was untouched. I looked around and spotted a muddy shoe print on the wooden floor, the exact style of shoes Savannah was wearing when she visited me that afternoon. The chill I felt didn't come from the snow outside. It came from a truth I didn't want to admit. Savannah had tried to take what wasn't hers, and she likely wasn't done. I got a call from Mom on a Sunday morning while I was making coffee in the kitchen. Her voice was panicked, broken. Ellie, go to the hospital. Savannah, she had an accident. The safe, it fell on her. I froze. The coffee cup slipped from my hand and shattered on the tile floor. 15 minutes later, I was in the emergency room of the regional hospital. Mom was sitting in the waiting area, pale, clutching the old knit scarf she always carried. When she saw me, she rushed over, eyes red. She came to the house last night. Alone. I thought she was just looking for a few keepsakes. I had no idea she went down to the basement. I gripped the strap of my bag, heart racing. How did the safe fall? It's heavy. I think she tried to open it. Maybe forced it, pulled or tilted it, then lost balance. Mom choked up. When I heard that loud crash and her screaming, I thought my heart stopped. About an hour later, the doctor came out and said Savannah had a broken right leg, soft tissue injuries in her lower back, and would need to stay in the hospital for at least a few weeks. I stepped into her room. She lay there with her leg in a cast, staring blankly at the ceiling. There was no sign of regret. "What are you doing here?" she asked dryly. "I'm not really sure," I replied honestly, standing a few feet from the bed. "Don't look at me like you've never kept secrets," Savannah said, scoffing. "I know what's in the safe. Don't think I'm stupid." I stayed silent. She continued, exhausted. "You're not the only one who's had it rough. My life hasn't been easy either, Ellie." I didn't answer. I couldn't argue with someone lying in a hospital bed, wounded both physically and emotionally. What she did was wrong, but I wasn't heartless enough to walk away completely. As I was about to leave, a man in a dark suit walked in. I recognized him immediately. Ryan, Savannah's husband. He didn't even look at me. He walked straight to her bedside, placed a stack of papers on the nightstand, and said firmly, "I brought the divorce papers. Sign them." Savannah froze. "What? You think I don't know you blew through your inheritance paying off credit cards, buying designer bags, hiring a personal stylist?" Ryan said, calm and cold. "I stayed quiet long enough, but breaking into your mother's house looking for more money? That's it." Savannah gasped, then yelled, "I just wanted what's mine. I'm his daughter too." Ryan looked at her, eyes devoid of any warmth. "Your father gave you your share, $100,000. And you burned through it in less than a year on things that meant nothing. Don't blame others for your own choices." He turned to me and nodded. "I'm sorry, Ellie. You didn't deserve to be dragged into this." After he left, Savannah threw her pillow to the floor in frustration. "He doesn't understand, and neither do you." I picked up the pillow and put it back. "No, Savannah. You're the one who refuses to understand." She turned away, tears falling silently. On the table beside her bed, next to the unsigned divorce papers, was a part-time job magazine. The cover read in bold, "Start over. It's not too late." I walked out, heart heavy. I didn't know if Savannah had the courage to change, but I knew this time she had no one left to lean on. And maybe that's the only way my sister would learn to grow, through the collapse of everything she thought she could control. A few weeks after Savannah was discharged, spring arrived in our little town. The last patches of snow melted off the wooden porch, making way for the first rays of sunlight streaming through the window. Mom and I slowly settled back into our routine, fixing up the main house, rearranging the backyard the way Dad used to every year. But this time, I did it with a completely different mindset. I gently folded Dad's old scarves, tucked them into a cedar chest, then sank to the floor, my hand resting instinctively on my belly. Yes, I was pregnant. I found out 2 days after I left the hospital where Savannah stayed. At first, it was mild morning nausea, then unusual fatigue. I thought it was just stress, until that test showed 2 red lines. I cried. Not out of fear, but from shock. From emotion, from the realization that a new life was forming, just when I thought I had lost all sense of family. When I told Mom, she held me for a long time. Her hands trembled, but her eyes lit up with pure joy. "Your father, he would have been so happy," she whispered. "He always dreamed of holding a grandchild." I nodded, swallowing my emotions. Even thinking about it was enough to make me cry again. I decided to move in with Mom for good, not just because she needed me, but because I needed her too. Her support, her wisdom, and her calm strength would help me through motherhood. I took a leave from the library and poured everything into preparing our home for a new beginning I had never expected. As I started building a family, Savannah went the opposite direction. She moved into a small rental near the industrial zone on the west side of town. After signing the divorce papers, Ryan cut off her credit cards, car, and all financial support. For the first time in her life, Savannah had to apply for a job, wake up early, and work part-time at a hardware store just to pay rent. Mom visited her a few times. She was still Mom, forgiving, soft-hearted, always leaving room for those who hurt her. I didn't go. Not out of anger, but because I needed space. I needed Savannah to face the very life she once looked down on. Simple, quiet, but rich in meaning. One day, Savannah came to my house. Unannounced. She stood outside, holding a small cardboard box. When I opened the door, she was silent for a moment, then handed it to me. These were Dad's. I found them in an old document bag at my apartment with Ryan. I thought you should have them. I took the box and opened it. Inside were some old photos and a few handwritten notes from Dad, including one unopened letter addressed to me. Owie, if you're reading this, then I'm probably no longer around. But I believe in you, the way you've always pushed through hard times. I left you the back house, not because it's the smallest, but because it holds the biggest thing. My trust. I folded the letter, looked up at Savannah. Her head was lowered, eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not for the safe, but for all the years I missed. With you, with Dad, with everything that really mattered." I didn't speak, but I nodded. Forgiveness isn't a word. It's the absence of resentment. She turned and walked back toward the windy road, while I stepped back inside, hand resting gently over my growing belly. Behind me, an old chapter had closed. A chapter of loss, envy, and painful lessons. Ahead of me was a new one, where I wouldn't be alone, where I would become a mother, and where I hoped my child would grow up in a home filled with love, truth, and forgiveness. I couldn't bring Dad back to hear he was going to be a grandpa, but I believed wherever he was watching and smiling. My story is a journey from loss to renewal. From an old garden shed, I didn't just find material inheritance. I rediscovered trust, gratitude, and the meaning of family. While my sister lost everything to greed, I found the true value of unconditional love. Now, as I prepare to welcome a new life, I understand that beginnings often grow from the simplest places, and sometimes from where we least expect. And what do you think about Ellie's choices and Savannah's downfall? Who do you believe truly inherited the most? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt and surprising family stories to come.